Okay, so today we're diving into some fascinating training materials
Oh,
for
cool.
aspiring counselors.
Okay.
Specifically, people who want to work with
Mhm.
HSPs, highly sensitive people.
Right.
And we're going to be looking at kind of a unique blend of self-affirmation,
Interesting.
Adlerian psychology,
Oh,
and what this document calls
okay.
the aesthetics of human nature.
Interesting.
So it's a really,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's an interesting mix. And I think our mission today is to
Mhm.
really try to extract some key insights
Mhm.
into this particular counseling approach,
Right.
especially,
Mhm.
those first steps. What does it look like
Yeah. How do you start?
when you're first working with a client?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
how important is that self-awareness
Self-awareness for the counselor.
for the counselor? Yeah,
That's interesting.
absolutely. So right off the bat,
Okay.
this material defines counseling as being about,
Yeah.
problem solving,
Problem solving.
which on the surface seems pretty
Yeah. I mean,
pretty
fills it
clear.
in sense. Yeah.
I'm curious how this particular approach
Yeah.
tackles the unique challenges of counseling HSPs.
Right, because I mean, a lot of approaches on maybe
Yeah.
like healing past trauma
Yeah.
or,
Right.
gaining insight
Yeah.
into subconscious patterns. And
Yeah.
this seems like it's much more pragmatic. It's
Okay.
about equipping the client with like the
Yeah.
tools and strategies they need
Okay.
to address very specific
Right.
challenges.
Okay, so then it goes on to outline this very specific ratio,
Okay.
9.3.1,
9.3.1.
or that initial stage of counseling.
Okay.
And yeah, it really emphasizes spending a lot of time
Okay,
listening
to the client.
to the client, what they're saying, their nonverbal cues,
Okay.
really, really absorbing their message.
I see.
And then there's validation,
Validation.
making sure the client feels
Right.
heard and understood.
Heard and understood. Yeah.
And finally, questioning.
Questioning, but the
So
right questions.
Asking the right questions
Okay.
to get that deep understanding. I
Mhm.
can definitely see
Okay.
how that 9.3.1
Yeah.
could be especially important when working with
Yeah.
highly sensitive people.
I was going to say because
Right.
HSPs, they often need more time to
Right.
process their emotions and to
Yeah.
feel truly heard.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I do wonder,
Okay.
if you're only
Right.
focusing on problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
are you neglecting some of that emotional depth
Okay.
that some clients might
Right.
need?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's not necessarily about neglecting the emotions. It's about creating a safe space where
Right.
those emotions can be expressed and understood.
Right, okay.
So I think that
Mm-hmm.
initial time spent on
Yeah.
listening and validation
Right.
helps build that
Yeah.
rapport and trust,
Right.
which is crucial
Yeah.
for any therapeutic relationship.
Absolutely.
But
Mhm.
especially with someone who's highly sensitive.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does those
Yeah.
right questions?
Right. What makes a question right? Yeah. What makes a question
Or-
right? Yeah. What makes a question right
What does that even mean
in this context?
in this context?
Well, I think it's about asking questions that are
Okay.
not only relevant to the science situation,
Right.
but also sensitive to their emotional state.
I see.
Remember, we're dealing with
Yeah.
highly sensitive people.
Right.
So even the way a
Uh-huh.
question is phrased
Yeah.
can have a big impact.
It can have a huge impact.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
So the training then
Yeah.
dives into
Right.
therapy skills and techniques.
So this is where
And this seems like where the counselor's
the rubber meets the road.
expertise really comes into play.
Right, exactly. They're
Yeah.
using different tools and approaches based on them training.
And speaking of understanding the client's perspective,
Yeah.
this is where Adlerian psychology comes in, right?
Oh, yeah.
Can you unpack that a little
Yeah,
bit?
so Adlerian psychology really focuses on the individual's unique perspective and their striving for
Yeah.
things like belonging and purpose.
Interesting.
It really emphasizes the importance of understanding the
Okay.
individual's lifestyle,
Okay.
their values,
Right.
their beliefs.
Okay, so essentially,
Right.
so in this framework,
Yeah.
the counselor would likely use these principles
Right.
to help the client understand their own motivations and goals.
Okay, so the next section really focuses on
Okay.
the importance of introspection and iteration
Introspection and iteration.
for the counselor.
For a counselor, yeah.
So they need to constantly be reflecting
Right.
on their approach,
Uh-huh.
their own biases,
Okay.
and adjusting.
Testing based on client's progress.
Progress, yeah.
It's that idea of lifelong learning.
Lifelong learning.
But not just for the client,
Not just for the
and
client,
counselor as well.
but for the counselor. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's a continuous feedback loop. The
Yeah.
counselor's always
Yeah.
learning and refining their approach
Right.
based on how the client's responding.
Exactly. And that brings us to
And that brings us to a really important
a
challenge.
really important challenge, which is
Cognitive bias.
cognitive bias.
Yeah.
The cognitive bias.
The cognitive bias
problem, right.
Yeah.
We all see the world
We all see the world
through our own lens,
through our own lens.
our own
And it's not
experiences,
just some
assumptions.
Counselors too.
Counselors too, everyone.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
cognitive biases are like
Yeah.
these mental shortcuts our
Right.
brains use. They help us process information quickly.
Right.
But they can also lead to errors in judgment.
Errors in judgment.
Especially when working with someone as unique,
Right.
as a highly sensitive person.
So, for example.
Like, for example,
Yeah.
confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias.
Right.
Okay.
Is our tendency to favor information that
Right.
confirms
Yeah.
our existing beliefs.
Our existing beliefs, right?
Which could lead us to misinterpreting a client's actions or words.
Right. So how can counselors,
How can counselors,
or anyone really,
yeah, work to overcome their own biases?
I mean, I think
it starts with awareness. Like, the first step is to acknowledge that we all have biases.
Right.
And then we can start to identify our own personal biases.
Right.
From there, we can develop strategies to mitigate their impact.
Yeah.
Like actively seeking out diverse perspectives and
Absolutely.
challenging our own assumptions.
Wow, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. I mean, we've explored such a unique approach to counseling, one that's really rooted in problem solving.
Problem solving.
Deep listening, validation, and a constant awareness of our own limitations.
Right.
It's really made me realize that if even our perception of others
it makes you wonder
is influenced by our own biases, how can we ever truly understand another person's experience?
Another person's experience, It's a question worth pondering. I think as we navigate our relationships...
Both personal and professional.
Worth pondering.
I think as we navigate our relationships...
Both personal and professional, It's a great point to leave on, I think. Absolutely.
Yep.